Hi, it's Tziporah here. In this video, I'm going to share with you what things are like now for me and my severe BPD after having done lots of inner child reparenting work and other methods of self work versus what it was like before. I'm going to be talking about each of the 9 traits of BPD, so make sure to stick around and watch the whole video because at the end, I'm going to tell you about how angry and explosive I used to actually be versus what it's like now. Fear of abandonment. In regards to my marriage relationships, I no longer have that fear of abandonment that's attached to our conversations or disagreements or things just not going well. It used to become so overwhelming that I would actually stop him from leaving the house or try to make him come home to talk about things because it would feel so permanent and scary. Taking space just didn't feel safe, but that doesn't happen anymore. And I think this has a lot to do with emotional boundaries and understanding that if something goes wrong or a disagreement happens or if someone leaves, it's not my job to fix it and make it stop. They too need space, and we can both come together and resolve it as equal people. I am no longer the child who's in trouble and needs mommy or daddy to stay and not leave me or abandon me. With fear of abandonment, I would get a lot of anxiety from it, meaning social anxiety. I would have interactions, I would hang out, and then I would go home and I would think about how stupid that was, what I could have said, and it would really beat down on me. This doesn't happen anymore. I don't feel like it's my job to make people like me. I actually enjoy myself and I enjoy being with myself. So if someone doesn't want to hang out with me or be with me, I don't have to fix that or make that stop. I can enjoy being by myself and not take it as a personal reflection of who I am. Unstable interpersonal relationships. My marriage is now stable and functioning, whereas before it was unlivable. Conversations and interactions could not be had, they would go totally awry, all because BPD and the communication and emotional issues would be creating these barriers in connection. My husband and I could barely live together. Even discussing basic matters would go horribly wrong. Even him asking my feelings on situations would feel like attacks, and I would become extremely defensive and shameful feeling. He even actually moved out for a bit, which was really helpful for me in my healing journey because I wasn't being constantly triggered. And when you're not being constantly triggered, you can actually address things. If the fight or flight is up, there's nothing to do because it's taking over. When my fight or flight was reduced, so I was able to address things. Now we can totally express emotions and resolve situations. I do notice that I still struggle with little pockets of shame here and there, but that's just something that one needs to kind of continually work on when doing inner child work. So, because of this trait of unstable relationships, I actually lost my first best friend due to it. Now, I didn't know that at the time because I was 10 years old. So, my first best friend, another girl came into the picture and became friends with us, and I just couldn't handle it. My emotions weren't being addressed properly by myself or through the support of those that should have been supporting me, like my family. And I just stopped talking to her and was really actually mean to her. So that was my first very regrettable BPD split, um, unstable relationship. And the ironic thing is, the last relationship that was also wrecked by BPD was my other best friend who I had had in middle school, high school, and throughout adult years. And in my mid-20s, I had a big life change, and I felt really hurt by my friend's, input in this. So I actually ended up splitting on her and ghosting her and not talking to her. Now, thankfully, she stayed supportive and loving, um, silently and behind the scenes, and she was in touch with my family still. So I was able to reconnect with her a few years ago, and now we've been talking ever since. We share pictures of our kids, and it's just really nice to be able to go back to that friendship and that she graciously accepted me back because not all people can do that. It just goes to show that healing can also heal relationships and that nothing's ever too far gone. In regards to friendships, I think it does get difficult as you get older to have just to maintain friendships and everything. But I'm at the point now where I can have friendships that are casual and I don't have that pressure of making people like me. Unclear or shifting self image. I feel pretty confident in who I am these days. The main thing that I can see that has resolved behind this is that when I'm around people, I no longer feel uncomfortable in my own skin. I don't feel uncomfortable being myself. And I'm not afraid to say my thoughts, opinions, or input and feel like it is going to be accepted or valid. I'm pretty confident in the fact that my input is okay. And that if I say something that I don't like or that isn't totally fitting to the situation, then that's okay. I can brush it off. I don't have to go and beat myself up about it. So basically, I don't get embarrassed anymore and interactions don't linger around anymore because I am more secure in who I am as a person and that other people are them and I am me. And I have those emotional boundaries that help with my self image. I used to be the biggest chameleon and I would always be watching for what I should say or the right thing to say and even mirroring people or just trying to make sure that people were liking me because I wasn't secure in who I was. Now I feel like I'm a whole person in a situation instead of a broken piece trying to wedge or fit into a situation. Impulsive, self destructive behaviors. I think impulsive and self destructive behaviors are basically down to zero at this point. I do still struggle with impulsivity in wanting to do things or wanting to get my word in. So I might interrupt people, which I'm working on, but nothing is so self destructive or destructive to others anymore. I used to be extremely impulsive and self-destructive, meaning if I was angry, I would do lots of fast driving, reckless driving, destroying my property, drugs and drinking, and other things that are pretty bad for you. Self harm and suicidal behaviors. I haven't overtly or intentionally self harmed in a long time. And I have never really been one of those people that are actually suicidal. I'm actually kind of scared of dying. The last time I self-harmed, which would have been cutting myself, was a teenager, like 16. When I was a teenager, I did self-harm a lot, and this would be through different methods, even just not taking care of myself or doing drugs, partying, and being in dangerous situations. Now, I looking back, I realized that this was a cry for help. This was because I wanted my mother to give attention to me in my emotional state. At the time, I didn't know that though. At the time, I was just on a path of destruction. My self harm now is reduced to basically nothing. But I do notice that if I'm frustrated or overwhelmed, I start to forget to take care of myself, maybe not eating enough or maybe eating too much. And that is a subtle form of self harm that I do have to be on top of. So, because those self harm behaviors are basically gone, aside from these very subtle ones, I do just have to make sure I'm taking care of myself, my mind, my emotions, and my body. Extreme mood swings. My mood swings are pretty stable nowadays. I can still get quite the emotional hit in the gut if something happens or something changes. Like if I'm looking forward to something and then it doesn't happen, I can get really bummed out and low. But thankfully, I can now bounce back relatively quickly. I can regulate my emotions fairly smoothly, which means that if extreme emotions come out, I can regulate them and they don't define my day. And more importantly, they don't define my actions and behaviors. The highs and low are still pretty high and low. At the same time, since I'm able to regulate and find that gray area and try to bring myself to the present, I am able to work through that. And there's a lot more stability in these mood swings nowadays. I would say that the emotional intensity is still very strong. And I think that's something that many borderlines will continue to work on and struggle with far down their healing path. Chronic feelings of emptiness. I think in this generation, a lot of us tend to struggle with emptiness and we fill that with shows, food, things, hobbies, interests. So I just have to find a balance in that for myself. I've always been a major distractor and want to dissociate through these things like TV shows, hobbies, drinking, partying, whatever it was. I used to actually be stoned 24/7 and just functioning through life with my job and everything. I still like hobbies and shows and interests, but I also have to be on top of observing what's going on inside instead of using it as a total distraction method. So I have to be on top of my needs, my wants, and when I'm actually feeling like something is lacking. And I have to be sure to check in on that and make sure that it is something situational or if I'm sinking into those chronic feelings of emptiness. Overall, I do feel more present and able to face myself and my emotions. So I think that's a good indicator that I am constantly looking at and ready to address any chronic feelings of emptiness. Feeling suspicious or out of touch with reality. I've come to learn that with less shame comes less paranoia, meaning the more I resolve my shame from trauma, the less I feel suspicious or paranoid about people judging or criticizing me. I used to absolutely dread doing errands. I would feel like people were looking at me and judging me, and that doesn't happen anymore. The most that happens to me now is just a major sensory overload. So I still don't love doing errands and going grocery shopping, but it's not that same suspicion and paranoia that it used to feel for me. I used to really feel and believe that I knew what people meant without clarifying or trying to understand them. And I think that a lot of BPD people might struggle with this. It's this mind reading thing that we learn from childhood. And now I'm able to give more room to ask questions, clarify, and understand instead of just assuming I know what people are feeling or thinking about me. It really used to feel like the world was out to get me, that it was against me, and that any attempt at understanding my opinion or my emotions were a way to get information out of me to use against me. As I mentioned in my video about BPD and paranoia, I actually experienced such paranoia after giving birth to my son that I felt like the nurses were talking about me. I actually heard them talking about me, which was impossible because I heard them talking about me in English, but I was in a Hebrew speaking hospital. That level of paranoia was very rare to me, mainly due to lack of food and lack of sleep, but it does go to show how severe things can get because it felt very real. As far as relationships go, I try to squash any paranoia or suspicion by just being straightforward, by asking clarifying questions, or just practicing my emotional boundaries and realizing that if someone has a problem with me, they can express it themselves. I don't have to go looking for it or feeling in trouble or suspicious that someone is actually against me when they're not. Before, I would not communicate at all and I would just fill in all the blanks by myself. So I realized that emotional boundaries and confidence in communication is one of the greatest ways to overcome this suspicion and paranoia when it comes to relationships. Feeling out of touch with reality is quite rare for me nowadays. It used to be very often, though, that I was sort of fading into this out of touch of reality feeling. Now I might notice it if I'm feeling very depressed or angry emotions. But as with anything else, I try to regulate and make myself present and kind of bring myself out of it so that the issue does not take over. Explosive anger. Explosive anger has been the hardest trait for my whole life, hands down. I've always been one to throw things, break things, scream, damage my property or the property of my family growing up. Even personal items that were dear to me because I could just not redirect the anger that I felt inside. Screaming, raging, destruction, which included the self harm, ever since I was a young teenager. So, the inner child and reparenting work has helped a lot to reduce all of this stored anger from throughout the years. Explosive anger has been the hardest for me. The irritation or annoyance that I now feel, I have to be on top of and make sure that it is not going to turn into explosive anger. And thankfully, since I've reduced so much of that stored anger, it doesn't turn into explosive anger. It could be that these little annoyances and irritations, if they build up, it could turn into something like a snap, but it's not a full on blackout rage like it used to be. It's something that I can handle and regulate. Everybody has to regulate emotions, not just BPD people. So it is something that we all need to learn when it comes to anger. It's just that BPD people have more severe anger and this can make it harder. So I would say overall, this trait is the one that I've had to be on top of the most, making sure I'm expressing myself well, treating myself well, eating, sleeping, all of these things in order that explosive anger doesn't try to make an appearance. Because I think, like I said, this would be the trait that I would have struggled with the most my whole life. It feels good to be in a place where I don't have explosive rage anymore, and I don't break my things or miss out on things because of that anger. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below.